So, Tony Yoka successful this evening after stopping Big Joe Djeko in the 12th round. Djeko calling no mass as he couldn't take any more under a barrage of punches. Yoka landing the jab, which saw Big Joe turn away and say no more of that. It's a shame. I thought Joe acquitted himself really well. I was looking forward to the fight. I wanted to see what he, and I felt he could give a good example of himself. I felt he could really show himself to a good showcase, and I think he did that. I really do. I think the fight was mildly competitive. You've got to remember Joe was operating at cruiserweight. He is a big man for the weight. He's come up to heavyweight, and I thought he did okay. He had his moments, mostly on Yoka's terms. When Yoka decided not to work, Joe would at times. It was fleeting, but he did. But this fight ultimately came down to the better fundamentals. If you want to show a young fighter why the fundamentals of the sport are so important, the base, having that foundation, this was it. There was no flash stuff from Yoka. It was just real simple jab high, jab low, feint high, jab low, or vice versa. You can see the Andre Ward, Virgil Hunter slash influence in his work. He jabs that midriff just like Andre does. And he basically put the water in the basement and sunk Djeko late. Joe's punches were starting, the crispness was coming off of them. He was becoming more and more ragged by round 10. He was arm punching just to survive. Round 11, I thought he could have been gotten out of there. And round 12, his face, he was already swelling up before that, but it was starting to come on top. He was riding a lot of shots, but his hands were in even worse positions than they were before. He had no defense for the volume that was coming. And Yoka was still relatively fresh. The fight was fought at a speed which completely suited Yoka. Yoka didn't wow me, but he was consistent. I think better heavyweights would have had Djeko out of there within a couple rounds. I'm talking about the top guys. You've got to remember, we've got to match these guys and think he's an Olympic gold medalist from 2016. We're now in 2021. I would expect a bit more from him. Joe is ultimately a cruiserweight, a heavyweight who is operating at cruiserweight and getting away with, to a certain extent, his size and his rawness at that level and that weight. But up at heavyweight, you expect with him to be dealt with because of those lack of fundamentals. But Yoka never really pushed until the latter stages. He didn't switch up the gears. I just don't think it was that impressive a performance. I think there's flaws in his game, which we'll go into in just a moment. But he wins nonetheless, and I'd like to see him in a big fight relatively soon because otherwise I think they're just treading water for the sake of it. But for Djeko, I'd like to see him in with someone like Daniel Dubois in the summer or a Nathan Gorman. I think he would be a viable test for both men. One coming back from obviously the loss to Joyce in Dubois, and for Nathan Gorman, I just think he needs this sort of fight while the other options sort of pan out. Back to the action, and what won the fight for Yoka was the jab to the body and the jab to the head, especially that jab to the body. It slowed Djeko down. He had no defense for it. Djeko's left forearm needs to be higher there, and he needs to be hidden behind the shoulder to offer less target. He gave away too much target, especially to the body and also to the head. I mean, either way, he was getting caught with either shot, and they were all singles. You see here, his hands are not in a position. He can't change his head position quick enough. He's having to react to the second jab. For me, he has to go away and work on that. For Yoka, I'd like to see him implement some counter punching into his game. He needs to be shorter and crisper with his combinations in the mid to short range and has to work on the balance as he throws the right hand several times coming out of position in this fight. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Where do you see Tony Yoka going from here? For me, solid but not spectacular.